"You should marry my sister," the small girl informed him, with the grave certainty of the very young, and Benedict Ashford, 3rd Duke of Tarlmoor, nearly choked on his lemonade. He had come to the garden party under protest, as he came to all such things, and had escaped, as was his custom, to the quietest corner of the shrubbery, where he had been standing in armored solitude watching the bright throng at a safe distance and counting the minutes until he might decently leave. He had not heard the child approach. Children did not, as a rule, approach the Duke of Tarlmoor. Grown men and women found reasons not to, and children were generally hauled off by anxious governesses before they could disgrace their families by addressing him at all. And yet here was one 6 or 7, he judged, in a white frock with a blue sash gone crooked and one hair ribbon coming loose, a half-eaten iced cake in one small fist, planted squarely before him on the gravel, regarding him out of frank brown eyes with the air of a diplomat opening negotiations. "I beg your pardon," Benedict said. "You should marry my sister," the child repeated patiently, as one obliged to explain a simple matter to a slow adult. "Rosamond. She is over there by the roses minding me, which she always has to do and never gets to dance because she is the eldest and mamma says she is on the shelf, though I do not see any shelf. I have looked. She is very kind and she is very clever and she can name every bird and she never tells anyone how sad she is. And you are the grandest gentleman here and everyone is frightened of you and nobody is talking to you either. So I thought," the child concluded with irresistible logic, "that you might as well be lonely together. It would be more comfortable than being lonely separately. That is what Rosamond always says about the two of us." Benedict Ashford stared down at the small, determined face, and found, to his considerable astonishment, that he had nothing whatever to say. He was not a man who was often at a loss. He had built a reputation, carefully over a dozen years, for being a man who was never at a loss, cold, exact, unanswerable, a man whose displeasure ended conversations and whose silences ended careers. Mothers had thrown their daughters at him for a decade and he had let them all bounce off. He had turned aside every lure, every artful blush, every carefully staged encounter, with a bored precision that had made him famous and feared, and though he did not care to dwell on it, entirely alone. And now a child of 7 with a crooked sash and a slipping hair ribbon had walked up to him in a shrubbery, and named the one thing about him that no adult in England had ever dared name aloud, that he was lonely, and had done it not as an insult but as a simple observation, the way she might have observed that it was warm, or that the cake was good. "Your sister," Benedict said, when he had recovered the power of speech, "would very likely be mortified to know you are proposing her to strangers in the shrubbery." "She would be dreadfully mortified," the child agreed cheerfully. "She would go pink and pretend she did not know me. She does that. But somebody has to see to it because she will not see to it herself, and Mamma is too busy seeing to Cassie and Jane who are prettier and Papa does not notice anything, and I am the only one who has time. She reads me to sleep every night," the girl added as though clinching the argument, "even when she is tired, even when she has been crying, which she thinks I do not know about but I do, because the pillow is damp in the morning. So you see she must be looked after and I have decided it shall be you, because you are grand enough that Mamma could not object, and lonely enough that you might actually be kind to her, which the grand ones usually are not." She frowned, considering. "Are you kind?" "No," Benedict said honestly. "I am generally reckoned to be the reverse." "I don't believe you," said the child. "You are still talking to me. The kind ones talk to me and the unkind ones tell my governess to take me away. You have not once told my governess to take me away." She popped the last of the iced cake into her mouth and regarded him with sticky triumph, as one who has rested her case. "Her name is Rosamond Fairley. She is by the roses. She has a gray gown because the pretty ones got the good dresses, but she does not mind, or she says she does not. Go and talk to her. I shall watch from here to make sure you do it properly." And Benedict Ashford, Duke of Tarlmoor, feared from London to the sea, found himself looking across the sunlit lawn toward a stand of roses, where a young woman in a gray gown stood a little apart from the bright party, exactly as he stood a little apart, watching the dancing she was not part of with an expression he recognized instantly and intimately, because he had worn it himself at 100 such gatherings. The careful, pleasant, well-schooled expression of someone who has decided not to mind being left out, and minds. She was not the prettiest woman at the party. The child had been quite right about that. 2 or 3 younger girls nearby in prettier gowns plainly outshone her in the ordinary reckoning. But there was something in the way Rosamund fairly stood, the straight back, the tilt of the head, the intelligence in the still face as she watched the crowd she was not asked to join, that caught him and held him, and he realized he had been staring rather longer than was polite. "You are staring," the child observed. "That is a good beginning. Papa stared at Mama, Grandmama says, and look what came of it. Go on." "I am not," Benedict said with dignity, "going to be managed into a courtship by a person who cannot yet reach the lemonade table without assistance." "Then I shall fetch her to you," the child said, with the terrible decisiveness of the small, "and you may be surprised into it instead, which is quite different." And before Benedict could frame a single word of protest, she had darted off across the lawn on her short legs, sash flying, ribbon abandoning the last of its grip on her hair, straight toward the roses and the woman in gray. Benedict watched, with a kind of horrified fascination, as the child reached the woman in gray, seized her hand, and began tugging her, visibly protesting, visibly reluctant, back across the lawn toward the shrubbery, chattering all the way. He had time, in the 20 seconds it took, to consider walking off entirely, to consider the vast indignity of being delivered a bride by a 7-year-old in front of the assembled county, to consider a dozen cutting things he might say to extract himself. He did none of them. He stood his ground, which surprised him, and waited, which surprised him more. Rosamund fairly arrived before him, pink to the ears, exactly as her sister had promised, and swept a curtsy that was correct and mortified in equal measure. "Your Grace, I am so very sorry. My sister has the most appalling manners and the most decided opinions, and I cannot apologize enough. Prudence, let go of the dukes. You have not. Tell me you have not been saying things." She caught the child's expression and closed her eyes briefly, as one confirming a catastrophe. "Oh, you have, of course you have. Your Grace, whatever she has told you, I beg you will forget it entirely, and I will take her home this instant, and you need never." "She told me," Benedict said, "that you can name every bird." Rosamund stopped, the pink flush deepened. "She what?" "Every bird." She was quite firm on the point. "She also informed me that you are clever and kind, and that you read to her every night even when you are tired, and that you are lonely, and that I am lonely, and that we should therefore marry, on the grounds that it would be more comfortable to be lonely together than lonely separately." He watched the mortification wash over her in a fresh wave, and found, unexpectedly, that he did not want to prolong it. "I have heard a great many marriage proposals in my time, Miss Fairley. Yours, that is, your sister's, on your behalf, is by some distance the most persuasive, because it is the first that has troubled to notice I am a person at all, rather than a title with an income attached. So I find I am not offended. I am rather more disarmed than I have been in a decade, which is your sister's doing, and I do not quite know what to do about it." Rosamund looked at him then, really looked, for the first time, the pink fading into something more careful, and Benedict saw her recalibrate, saw her set aside the mortified apology and the schooled pleasantness, and actually consider the strange large man her sister had dragged her to, with a directness that matched the child's own and was, he thought, plainly where the child had learned it. "She is not wrong about the birds," Rosamund said slowly, "or, I fear, about the rest of it. Prudence is 7 and has not yet learned that some true things are not to be said aloud. It is her worst fault, and I confess privately my favorite thing about her." She glanced down at the child, who was watching the pair of them with unconcealed satisfaction. "I am mortified, your Grace, but I will not insult you by pretending she invented it all. I do mind roses I am not asked to dance among. I did stand apart. She sees a great deal, my sister. She sees more than is comfortable. It is what happens, I think, when a child is the only one in a family who bothers to look." "Yes," Benedict said quietly, I have found exactly that. I was the only one in mine. Something passed between them at that. A small recognition, quick and real. The recognition of two people who have each stood apart from a bright party and learned to say they did not mind. And the child Prudence, watching, gave a small satisfied nod, as a general watches a maneuver unfold according to plan. "I do not dance," Benedict said abruptly. "I have not danced in 12 years. I dislike it. I am told I do it badly, though no one has dared tell me so to my face, which is its own kind of loneliness. But there is lemonade, and there is a bench in the shade by the fountain that no one else has claimed, and I find I should like to sit on it and hear you name birds, Miss Fairley, if you can bear the company of the most feared man in 3 counties for a quarter of an hour. Your sister may supervise. She has appointed herself, and I have learned it is useless to resist her." And so it was that the Duke of Tarlmoor, who never sat with anyone, spent the better part of an hour on a shaded bench by a fountain with a woman in a gray gown and a sticky-fingered child, and named, at Prudence's insistence, every bird that came to the water, Rosamond supplying the names, dry and exact, and occasionally, when he doubted her, faintly indignant, and Benedict discovering that he liked the indignation better than he had liked anything at a garden party in his life. He learned over that hour, and the ones that followed, the shape of her. She was 25, the eldest of 5, in a family with more daughters than fortune, where the pretty younger girls were the family's investment, and the plain eldest its unpaid nursemaid. The one who minded the little ones, ran the errands, sat with the ailing grandmother, and stood by the roses at the parties, useful and unregarded, quietly folded into the machinery of a household that had decided her season was over before it had properly begun. She bore it, he saw, with a grace that was not resignation but something tougher, and she loved the small sister who had proposed her to a duke with a fierce protective tenderness that was the warmest thing in her carefully guarded person. And she did, in fact, know every bird and a great deal else besides, having educated herself out of her father's neglected library, because no one had thought a plain eldest daughter worth the expense of masters. And Benedict Ashford, who had spent 12 years being feared, discovered over the course of a summer what it was to be, instead, seen and to see, to have someone to name the birds for, to have a small crooked-sashed ambassador run to meet his carriage on the drive and inform him of the week's developments, to sit in the evening on a fountain bench and say nothing at all and not be lonely in the saying of it. He called it, at first, an amusement. He called it a kindness to the child. He called it 100 things that were not the true thing, because the true thing frightened him, as it frightens men who have armored themselves precisely so as never to have to feel it. It was Prudence, of course, who forced the matter, because Prudence had appointed herself and did not believe in half measures. He went back the next week. He told himself it was to return a book he had borrowed from the fountain bench, a small worn volume of natural history that Rosamond had produced from her work-basket to settle a dispute about a warbler, and a gentleman returned what he borrowed. But the truth, which he did not examine, was that the great cold house of Tarlmoor had felt, on the Monday after the garden party, unaccountably larger and quieter than it had felt in years. And he had found himself calling for his horse before he had quite decided to. Prudence met him on the drive. She had, he gathered, established a lookout, and she came flying down the gravel with her news before his horse had stopped. That Rosamond had been made to give up her afternoon to trim Cassie's new bonnet, that Mamma had said again about the shelf, that there had been a letter from horrid old Mr. Corley, which Prudence had not been able to read, but had disliked the look of on principle, a full and unsolicited report on the state of the household, delivered with the gravity of a minister briefing a sovereign. Benedict listened to all of it with a solemnity that delighted her, and asked intelligent questions, and was rewarded with the child's complete and lasting devotion, which he found, to his surprise, he valued. And then Rosamond came out, flushed from the bonnet trimming, apologizing before she reached him, and he handed her back her book, and somehow the handing back turned into a walk in the shrubbery, and the walk into another hour on another bench, And Benedict rode home in the dusk, having said almost nothing of consequence and feeling as though something of great consequence had nonetheless occurred. It became, over the weeks, a habit, and then a need he would not name a need. He came Tuesdays and Fridays, and then Tuesdays and Fridays and whatever other day he could invent a pretext for, and the pretexts grew thinner and no one was deceived by them, least of all Prudence, who had stopped pretending to believe in the books and now simply announced, when his horse turned the corner, "He has come to see Rosamond," in a carrying voice that made her elder sister long for the ground to open. He learned her by degrees, the way he had never had the patience to learn anyone. He learned that beneath the schooled pleasantness was a wit as dry as his own and considerably kinder, that she read everything and remembered all of it, that she had a way of going very still and watchful before a bird settled that was the twin of her small sister's diplomatic gravity, so that he understood at last where the child had got it. He learned that she never complained of the family that used her, and that the not complaining was not meekness, but a kind of pride so deep it would not give her mother the satisfaction. He learned that she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, the tiredness of a person who has been useful to everyone and precious to no one, save one small fierce sister who saw her clearly. And he learned, watching her with Prudence, the thing that undid the last of his armor, that Rosamond fairly loved without condition or calculation, poured herself out on a child who could give her nothing but devotion in return, and asked for nothing back, that she was, in short, everything the glittering husband-hunting misses of a dozen seasons had not been, precisely because no one had ever taught her to hunt, or told her she was worth the catching. He knew by the middle of the summer that he was in love. He was too honest with himself, in the end, not to know it. What he did not know was what to do about it, because Benedict Ashford had spent 12 years making certain he could not be hurt, and loving a woman meant handing her the power to hurt him, and every instinct he had built over a hard and lonely decade told him to withdraw, to invent no more pretexts, to let the thing cool before it could cost him anything. He was, God forgive him, on the very edge of doing exactly that, of retreating, of protecting himself, of letting Rosamond fairly fold quietly back into the machinery of her family, and be married off to some sensible Mr. Corley, while he returned to his safe cold solitude, when the child forced his hand, as she had forced it from the first, by flinging herself into a flooded river rather than watch her sister be handed to the wrong man. And Benedict would think ever afterward that he owed his whole happiness to the fact that a 7-year-old had less patience with his cowardice than he had himself, and had been prepared to risk her life to cure him of it, and that he had come within a hair's breadth, out of sheer self-protecting folly, of deserving to lose them both. There had been one evening, near the end of that summer, that he would carry with him always as the moment he ought to have understood himself, and did not quite dare. He had stayed later than was proper, and the light had gone gold and then blue over the Fairley garden, and Prudence had fallen asleep on the bench between them, her head heavy against Rosamond's arm, one hand still curled around a fallen ribbon. And Rosamond had sat very still so as not to wake her, and looked down at the sleeping child, and said, low, not quite to Benedict and not quite to herself, "She thinks she can arrange the whole world into being kind. I have not the heart to tell her it does not arrange. She will learn it soon enough, and I would give a great deal to spare her the learning." "Perhaps she is right," Benedict had said, "and the rest of us have simply given up too early." Rosamond had looked at him then in the blue dusk with the sleeping child between them, and something had trembled in the air that neither of them named. "You are not what they say of you," she had said quietly. "In the county, they say you are cold. You are not cold. You are careful. There is a great difference, and I think only a careful person can see it in another." And Benedict, who had been called cold for 12 years and had built his whole life on letting them believe it, had felt that single true observation go through his armor like a key finding a lock, and had said nothing, because he had not trusted his voice, and had ridden home in the dark shaken to his foundations by a woman who had looked at the most feared man in 3 counties, and seen, instead, a careful one. He should have spoken then, he knew it riding home, he did not. He let a fortnight go by, and told himself he was being wise, and it was only the river and the child's terrible courage that saved him at the last from his own carefulness. That and a lost hair ribbon, and a small girl who had decided, on the first day, in a shrubbery, that the loneliest man at the party had simply not yet been introduced to the right person, and who had been prepared to move heaven and a flooded earth to see the introduction through. It happened at the end of the summer when Benedict rode over to the Fairley house, as he had taken, unaccountably, to doing 2 and 3 times a week, and was met on the drive not by his small ambassador but by the sound of the whole household in an uproar, and by Rosamond on the steps, white-faced, a travelling cloak half thrown on. "She has run away," Rosamond said before he was off his horse. "Prudence. There was a mamma has arranged a match for me, with the widowed Mr. Corley from the next parish, who wants a mother for his children and a manager for his house, and it is a very sensible arrangement, and I said I would consider it, because it is sensible, and then Prudence overheard and flew into a passion, and said I was meant for you and not for horrid old Mr. Corley, and that she would fix it, and now she is gone, your grace, an hour gone and no one knows where, and she is 7. And it is coming on to rain." Benedict was already turning his horse. Where would she go? Think, where does she go when she is unhappy? To the old dovecote in the east meadow, she hides there when she is cross, but that is a mile and across the river, and the river is up with the rain. Get the men searching the house and grounds in case she doubled back. I will take the dovecote. And he was gone at a gallop, before she had finished, riding hard across the meadows in the failing light with the first fat drops of rain beginning to fall, and he found the child not at the dovecote but on the near bank of the swollen river, soaked and furious and frightened, having got herself across a fallen log to the far side, and then, the water rising, been unable to get back, and stranded there crying with rage at her own predicament and at horrid old Mr. Corley in roughly equal measure. He got her. He left the horse, and went out along the treacherous log with the brown water sliding fast beneath, and reached her, and carried her back, she clinging to his neck, soaked and shaking, sobbing into his collar that she had only wanted to fix it, that Rosamond was meant for him, that she had heard him say Rosamond named the birds better than anyone, and that meant he loved her. Everyone knew that meant he loved her. And now Rosamond was going to marry horrid Mr. Corley, and be sad forever, and it was all spoilt. Benedict Ashford stood on the bank in the driving rain with a soaked, sobbing 7-year-old in his arms, and understood, with perfect and sudden clarity, that the child was entirely right, and that he was a coward, and that he had been calling 100 false names to a thing that had one true name, and that he had very nearly let it be married off to a widower in the next parish, because he had been too armored and too afraid to say the true name aloud. "She is not going to marry Mr. Corley," he said into the child's wet hair, and his voice was not quite steady. "I promise you I am going to see to it. You have done your part, you have done it magnificently and recklessly, and you are never to cross a flooded river again as long as you live. Do you hear me? But you were right, Prudence. You were right all along about all of it, and I have been a great fool, and it is time I stopped. Now stop crying. We are going home, and I am going to talk to your sister, and you are going to have dry clothes and hot milk, and you are going to be very smug about all of this for the rest of your life, and you will have earned every bit of it." Rosamond met them at the door, and the sight of the child safe undid her, and then the sight of the Duke of Tarlmoor, soaked to the skin, carrying her sister up the steps as though she were made of glass and gold together, undid something else. She got Prudence into dry things and warm milk in the arms of a weeping nursemaid, and then she came back to the hall where Benedict stood dripping on the flags, and she stopped and looked at him, and did not know what to say. He said it for her. "Do not marry Mr. Corley," Benedict said. "I know it is not my place. I know I have no right, and that I have spent a summer calling this 100 things it was not because I was afraid to call it what it is. But your sister, who is 7 and sees more than the whole of the rest of the world put together, told me on the first day that we should marry because it would be more comfortable to be lonely together than separately, and I laughed at her, and she was right, and I have been running from how right she was for 3 months." He took a step toward her, dripping, undignified, and did not care. I did not know I was lonely until a child pointed it out in a shrubbery. I did not know it could be mended until I sat on a bench and heard you name the birds. I do not want to be lonely separately, Rosamond. I have been lonely separately for 12 years, and it very nearly cost me the only thing that ever unfroze me. Marry me. Not because it is sensible, Mr. Corley is sensible. Be assured I offer you nothing sensible whatever, but because you see me and your sister saw me, and no one in 12 years had bothered to look, and I cannot go back to not being seen. Marry me, and bring the wretched, wonderful, river-fording child, who is to live with us and be insufferably smug forever, because I will not be parted from either of you. Will you have me? Rosamond fairly stood in the stone hall with the rain drumming on the roof and her heart in her throat, and Benedict watched the careful guardedness that a lifetime of standing by the roses had built come down, all at once, like a curtain. You rode into a flood for her, she said, low, unsteady. You went out along that log. You could have drowned, both of you, and you did not hesitate. I can see it in your face. You did not think of yourself for one instant. I have discovered, Benedict said, that I do not much think of myself any more. It is the two of you who have done that to me, between you, and I find I am glad of it, and I am not letting either of you go, Flood or Mr. Corley or the whole disapproving county be hanged. Rosamond, will you have me? Yes, Rosamond said, and the tears came now freely. The tears she had hidden in a damp pillow for years where only a watchful child could find them. Yes, oh, you soaking, ridiculous dear man, yes. I have wanted to say it half the summer and told myself it was impossible, that dukes did not marry plain eldest daughters who minded the little ones, that it was a kindness and no more, and here you stand dripping on the flags having pulled my sister from a river, asking me. She pressed her hand to her mouth, laughing through the tears. Yes, 100 times, and Prudence will be unbearable, you understand. Utterly unbearable. She will take the entire credit. She has earned the entire credit, Benedict said, and she shall have it. And he crossed the last of the wet flags and gathered his soaked bride-to-be against his soaked chest and kissed her, once, gently in the ringing rain and from the top of the stairs, wrapped in a blanket with a cup of hot milk. A small girl with a lost hair ribbon watched the whole of it and gave a long, deep, satisfied sigh, the sigh of a diplomat whose treaty has, against all odds, been signed. They were married in the autumn in the little church near Tarlmoor, and Prudence walked before the bride scattering the last roses of the year, and told everyone who would listen, and a great many who would rather not have, that she had arranged the entire match personally in a shrubbery on the first day, and that the Duke had been very slow about it and had needed a great deal of managing, but had come right in the end. No one contradicted her, because it was entirely true. Benedict Ashford took his wife and her small, determined sister home to Tarlmoor, and the great cold house that had frightened the county for a decade filled up, that winter, with the sound of a child naming birds from a book, and a woman's dry laughter, and a man who had forgotten how to laugh learning it again by their fire. He had been the most feared man in 3 counties, and entirely alone. He was now none of those things, and he owed the whole of it to a crooked blue sash and a slipping hair ribbon and a 7-year-old who had looked at the loneliest man at the party, and decided, with perfect confidence, that he had simply not yet been introduced to the right person. You are staring, Rosamond told him one evening by the fire, where Prudence lay drowsing against her side, book slipping from a small hand. I am, Benedict agreed. I am looking at the 2 people who unfroze me, and marveling that I very nearly missed you both by standing in a shrubbery being lonely. I do not intend to miss anything again. And he crossed the warm, bright room that had once been cold and sat down beside his wife and the sleeping child who had chosen him, and was, for the first time in his life,